Welcome all to the 9th of October 2023 Council meeting. I open the meeting at 7:03 p.m. I will now pass you on to the Chief Executive Officer, Ms Alison Beckwith, who will read out the formalities.
Thank you, Mayor. Welcome all to this ordinary meeting of Council. My name is Alison Beckwith and I'm the Chief Executive Officer here at Banyule. Tonight's meeting is being held in person in accordance with the provision of Council's governance rules and the Local Government Act 2020. The meeting is also being live streamed via Council's website and Facebook page. The live stream is not interactive. Any comments or private messages directed to us while the stream is live will not be presented to the Councillor group or have any bearing on tonight's meeting. Council's request to speak methods continue to allow participation of residents without having to attend the meetings in person. I'll just take you through some rules of participation. Please note that any public questions submitted to tonight's Council meeting will be read out by a member of our executive leadership team, and a verbal response will also be provided. Questions and responses will also be included in the meeting minutes following tonight's meeting. Council does not accept questions as part of the request to speak process, and no statement may be derogatory, defamatory or directed to an individual councillor, member of staff, ratepayer or member of the public. A 2-minute time limit does apply to all request to speaks tonight. The timer will be used and a warning will sound at the 1.5 minute mark. So we ask you to sum up, or if indeed being read out on your behalf by an officer, they will also sum up. We ask that members of the gallery please check their phones and ensure that it is either switched off or on silent mode to avoid disruptions. Thank you. If any members of the public depart the chamber before tonight's meeting ends and the meeting is still in progress, we ask that you please do not hold conversations with others until you're outside the building. Unfortunately, the noise from the foyer area, both outside the chamber and downstairs, reverberates into this chamber and affects those listening at home. And again, thank you in advance for that. I will now introduce you to the councillors who are in attendance tonight. I'll start to my left, and we have the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Alida McKern, Councillor Tom Malikan, Councillor Peter Dimorellis and Councillor Alison Champion. And those councillors on my right, the Mayor, Councillor Peter Castaldo, Councillor Elizabeth Neely, Councillor Rick Garotti and Councillor Mark Di Pasquale. We are also joined by our executive leadership team. We have Mark Gilio, Director of Corporate Services, Natasha Swan, Director of City Development, Darren Bennett, Director of Assets and City Services, and Joe Wilson, Acting Director of Community Wellbeing. Tonight with us is also our support crew to the councillor group, which includes our governance team, IT team and our JETS team coordinating our live stream. We thank you for participating tonight and thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, CEO. Now, our meeting is being held on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people, and on behalf of Banyule City Council, I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional custodians, and we pay respect to all our Wurundjeri Woiwurrung elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge any other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island elders joining us this evening. And Council is committed to and values diversity within our community. I will now read out Banyule's diversity statement that demonstrates our commitment. Our community is made up of diverse cultures, beliefs, abilities, bodies, sexualities, ages and genders. We are committed to access, equity, participation and rights for everyone, principles which empower, foster harmony and increase the well-being of an inclusive community. We now move on to apologies. We have one apology from Councillor Mitsonikos, who is on council-approved leave of absence. There are no other apologies. Leave of absence, nil recorded. We move to confirmation of minutes next. The ordinary meeting of Council held on the 25th of September 2023. Can I please have a councillor to move and second? Councillor Malikan moved. Second, Councillor Neely. Oh, do we have another mover that was present on the evening? Councillor McKern moved and seconded by Councillor Neely. Thank you for picking that up. I now put the motion. All those in favour? Tom? I declare the motion carried. Disclosure of interests. As required at any other meeting of council, councillors must declare a conflict of interest at the start of the meeting and leave the meeting when the item is presented to council. Councillors will be required to leave the meeting and return when the item has been resolved. At any point throughout the meeting, if any other councillor recognises that they have a general or material interest, they can flag that at the point and follow the same procedure. Are there any disclosures of interest? There are no disclosures. Officers that are present, I now ask whether you have a conflict of interest in any items presented before council this evening. No conflicts of interest. We now move on to urgent business. I note that there is no urgent business this evening. We now move on to petitions. There are no petitions this evening as well. We then now move on to item 3.1, award of contract 1309-2023, East Ivanhoe Preschool Upgrade. And there are no speakers to this item this evening. Now, councillors, there is an officer report before you as set out in the agenda papers. I'm now calling for a motion. Do I have a mover? Councillor Melican, seconded by me again. As mover, would you like to speak to the item?
I realise it's your ward, councillor, but yeah, if you look at the report, there's a great lot of tenders received from a very good panellist list, and the winning tender got an outstanding score of 90, which is quite impressive. And it's on budget and hopefully will be on time, so a great outcome. I hope it's a sign that contracts and building works have turned the corner and it's becoming more reasonable, because we've had some shocking outcomes from tender processes previously, but this is quite a good, very good outcome and a very significant project, so happy to support tonight.
Thank you, councillor. And I'll reserve my comments to the end. Any other councillors? Well, being in my ward, East Ivanhoe Preschool, I'm very excited to see this one move forward. It had some hiccups because of cost increases and the state government budget allocation to this project. An additional budget was allocated and we've gone out to tender and we received a good tender price. So we've landed in a good situation and we can finally move forward here. So that's very good to see. And the effect in the end is to double the capacity of this childcare centre for residents in the area. And so it's an important piece of infrastructure and it's exciting to see this one move forward after a number of delays. So it's a very good outcome. I will now put the motion. All those in favour? I declare the motion carried. We are now moving on to item 3.2, instrument of delegation from council to the Chief Executive Officer.
Mayor, if you can't quit.
We have a question. Councillor Garotti.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just have a few questions on this item and through you to the appropriate officer. But just with this one, first question is just seeking confirmation of the change in the instrument that's made. My review of the delegation is that the only item that's changed is the date to be passed by council from the 29th of May 2023 to 19 October 2023. Just seeking confirmation that that is the only change, or are there others that I may have missed? Through you, Mayor.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, and to respond to Councillor Garotti's question, you're very right. The only change for this particular instrument is the date from May to October, to keep in line with the other delegations that are before you and that'll be signed off by the CEO this week. Thank you.
Yeah, just a follow-up question on that matter. Given that the only proposed change is the date of approval, seeking an understanding as to why this particular delegation has come up again to the council for approval.
Thank you, through you, Mayor, and great question, Councillor Grotti. When we review all of the instruments, we like to review them in bulk. That's for a few reasons, internal, but also to keep in line with MADEX delegations and authorisations advice. We noted that the last time we brought up this particular delegation, there was a recommendation from Council to include a condition and limitation, and that was in relation to the internal audit. So we actually didn't want to be too presumptuous and assume that it was still going to be the same. So I wanted to afford Council the opportunity to have some input and insight before they were executed.
Mayor, a third question. In the delegation, the instrument comes into effect upon, from my understanding, the signature of the Mayor and the Chief Executive. But if I look at the delegation that we'll be looking to consider as part of item 3.3, that particular one comes into effect upon the fixing of the common seal of the council. And I'm just wondering, why is there a need for a delegation to be signed by the Mayor and CEO when it is duly approved by the council? And number two, why is this delegation being approved based on a signature of the Mayor and CEO when other delegations are approved based on the affixing of the common seal? Through you, Mayor.
Thank you. That's a good question. We're basing off the resolution from MADEX advice. The common seal can be used for the CEO delegation, but also the members of council staff delegation. They both require and are one of the same in that all delegations that are executed by council do require the council and the CEO's, the Mayor, and the CEO's signature. And that is in accordance with the advice that we've provided and best practice that we have been implementing as per MADEX service. Did I answer your question? Sorry.
Yeah, Mayor, I wasn't aware of seeing that particular legal advice in the information that was provided in the agenda packs. So happy to take at face value the feedback from the officer that that's the advice from the lawyers. I suppose I'm potentially heading into comments, but seeking clarification then for consistency purposes, should this council be adopting a common process, either the CEO and Mayor to sign off on all delegations or the affixing of the common seal? Through you, Mayor, to appropriate officer.
Thank you. That's a great recommendation, and we'll take that on board as we review for the next instrument of delegation review and make sure it's consistent.
Just to follow up, a further question, Mayor. Just in regard to the proposed recommendation for item 3.2, item 2, it states that the instrument comes into force immediately upon this resolution being made and being signed by the council CEO and Mayor. I'm just wondering, are the Mayor and the CEO intending to sign off on the delegation immediately this evening? Because a date of the 9th of October has been inserted, or would it potentially be more appropriate to amend point 2 of the recommendation to state that the instrument comes into force immediately upon being signed by Council's Chief Executive Officer and Mayor after being approved by Council? Advice sought from the appropriate officers. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Grotti. Through you, Mayor. I would read that item 2 to be that the matter needs to be resolved first, and therefore the next day the council's CEO and the Mayor would formally execute. The instrument would therefore have the date of the 10th of October.
Thank you, Mayor. So do we need to be moving an amendment then that clarifies that the date in the instrument of the delegation will be the 10th of October 2023? Because as presently stated, it is the 9th of October 2023.
seek some clarification from the appropriate officer on that.
Thank you. Sorry, just wanted to clarify my facts there. So the instrument of delegation will be, sorry, I'll start again. The last page on the instrument of delegation that's before you and in the attachments will have that the instrument of delegation is authorised by a resolution of council passed on today's date. It'll then be signed or proposed to be signed by the CEO and the Mayor, Mr. Peter Castaldo, and then have a date of execution being tomorrow. I do not think there is a need for amendment to that item that you're referring to, but if council wish to, they are inclined to do so.
Happy to be guided by officer advice there, but I think, as it was explained quite succinctly in the briefings, it's critical that council get these things right. So if council has made an error there, I'd be calling for some further legal advice back to this group. One final question, if I may, Mayor. In the pre-briefing discussion, there was commentary made that in the past, council may have been at risk of not meeting its legislative requirements. I'm seeking advice through the appropriate officers. What assurance mechanisms does this council have, and by extension our community, to ensure that council is always operating within its legislative requirements?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, and just reflecting on Councillor Garotti's comments, I think when we keep in mind instruments of delegation and authorisation review, we do note that there is always an opportunity or an existence of risk if a officer is not delegated properly, if there's been a realignment or if there's been some change to reform in between the two reviews. So I think that comment that, you know, we can be at risk is real. However, we put in some stringent checks and balances and controls to make sure that we keep up to date with all of the legislative reform. We have a process, a standard operating procedure in our department to make sure that we capture the advice from Maddocks and make sure that we undertake a really thorough review within the organisation. So that incorporates engagement with SMT, which is our senior leadership team, our executive leadership team. We provide training and development to all staff in relation to what delegations and authorisations are. And we make sure that we take into account any realignments or position changes that do occur. So there are quite a few checks and balances. We, of course, then make sure that that is kept in line with any advice that the sector are receiving from Local Government Victoria or the Inspectorate or any other regulators, and then put that advice and recommendations into our reports that are before Council tonight.
That's it. Thank you both. Councillors, there's an officer report set out before you and the agenda papers. I'm calling for a mover. Do I have a mover? Councillor Garotti, seconded by Councillor Malikan. Would the mover like to speak to the item?
Yes, Mayor, happy to speak to the item. And just for the benefit of the gallery, people might have been wondering, why am I spending 10 minutes of time in the public domain asking a whole series of questions regarding the delegations? We often talk in this chamber about some of the most important decisions that this council makes, and one of them is in fact what we as a council, as empowered by our community who are elected to serve, what we delegate our officers and in particular the Chief Executive to do. So I think it is absolutely critical that we go through this process rigorously, that we make sure that everything is aligned. Certainly, I think through the questions and answers, a couple of quick concerns, or not concerns, but areas for further investigation have been raised. One, as to whether or not the council should be affixing the common seal to all future approvals of delegations. I would certainly be encouraging the Chief Executive as well as the governance manager to explore that with the lawyers in the future. The second item, and the question was partially answered by the officer, and I really appreciate the quality of the analysis and advice that she's provided this evening, and thank her for that. But my question around our legislative compliance assurance was much more broader than just whether or not we're complying with legislation in regard to our instrument of delegations. It was concerning more our ability to be assured around all legislation and legislative changes that come to council. And to that end, the council will be appointing its committees again later this year upon the election of mayor and deputy. If fortunate to be supported to go on the Audit and Risk Committee again, I think it's something that I'd be tasking up that committee to look into the mechanism of legislative compliance assurance to the Audit Committee and by extension to this council. Because I never want to be in a position where anyone ever tells me that we were non-compliant with legislation and now we somehow are. I want to know what we're doing all the time to be compliant. And if we're not compliant, I want to ensure the mechanisms are there in place to do so. But other than that, very happy to recommend that this instrument be approved by the rest of the council. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Would the second like to speak to them? Any other councillors? Oh. No, we move. Tom Melican would, no. Any other councillors wish to speak to the item? No? I will now put the motion. All those in favour? Tom? I declare the motion carried. We're now moving on to item 3.3, instrument of delegation from council to members of council staff. There are no speakers to this item. We have a question from Councillor Garotti.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and through you again to the appropriate officers. But just seeking to understand that in this particular instrument, the delegations are being provided to individually named officers. So, for example, Natasha Swan, sorry, Natasha, to name you, but you're in the instrument. Karen Leader, I won't go, the list goes on. In the earlier instrument regarding the CEO, we did not name Alison Beckwith. We appoint the delegations to a particular position. And in the following agenda item 3.4, again, for that particular instrument, it looked to me upon reading that we award the delegations to a particular position within the council rather than a named individual. So just seeking clarification as to why this particular instrument, the individuals need to be named. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Grotti, and through you, Mayor. Just to confirm, the attachment that you're referring to should be the S6, Instrument of Delegation from Council to members of Council staff, and I'm not sure, and I don't want to be presumptuous, but I think you might also be referring to another attachment that is an Appointment of Authorised Officer instrument that does actually detail natural persons, being individuals of members of Council staff with statutory positions. So two mutually exclusive reports, two mutually exclusive attachments. The S6 that is before you tonight has positions. So by way of example, Manager, Governance and Integrity, or Building Inspector, as opposed to Kristen Fort, which you may see in the instrument as an attachment to, I believe it is 11A. Can you just clarify, please?
Yeah, the attachment's in regard to agenda item 3.4. So maybe we can raise that question at that particular agenda item, but that item 3.4 certainly has named individuals.
Yeah.
Compared to items 3.2 and 3.3 where they're positions.
Yes, I'm happy to talk to that now if you like, or, delegations
Go ahead.
and authorisations can be, difficult to wrap your head around. So the instruments of delegation are to positions within council. So that means that if there is a changeover in staff between the reviews, then a person who absorbs that position would just take on those delegated powers, duties and functions. An instrument of appointment to authorised officer is to a natural person, and we have a host of those that you don't see before you today, which the CEO has authority under relevant acts and legislation and her delegation to be able to execute. But those instruments provide a natural person with a statutory power to go and undertake enforcement activities. If that person left the organisation, that instrument would be needing to be revoked, and then the CEO would need to draft up a brand new authorisation for a particular natural person that was appointed. So I hope that answers your question. Delegations is to positions, appointment to authorised officers is to natural people by virtue of the role that they hold, which is normally a statutory power in which they need to exercise a statutory function.
Your question's been answered? Very good. All right, now councillors, there's an officer report set out before you on the agenda papers. I'm calling for a motion. Do we have a mover? Councillor Grotti and seconded by Councillor Neely. Would the mover like to speak to the item? Seconder? Any other councillor? Councillor McKern?
I'd just like to raise a query, Mayor, just regarding the delegations and the reference to natural persons. I think if I heard correctly, Manager, that indeed if the staff member cited leaves the council, that means that those delegations have to go back to the CEO for review and re-signing. Is that correct? Once a new member starts in that position, does it then need to come back to the council? And what is the actual requirement for delegations and named persons under the Local Government Act? Sorry, there's a few questions
That's
there.
okay. I'll attempt to answer them.
Thank
And if
you.
I don't, please just ask a follow-up question. I think it's important to note that under the Local Government Act, Section 11 specifically, it states that the council must delegate its powers, duties and functions to either the CEO or members of council staff. Through another provision in the legislation, the CEO has an ability to sub-delegate his or her or their powers, duties and functions accordingly. Natural persons are listed to authorisations, positions are appointed to delegations. So before you tonight, and I don't want to confuse the community, but this report details delegations to positions. The next report, or the one after, refers to appointments to authorised officers, which is to natural people. In the instance that somebody on that instrument leaves the organisation, we would take a report back to council and noting that there is a change, or if there was an additional planner that was employed and was required to do the things necessary on that instrument, we would then add them and bring them to you for consideration and final adoption. If there's a change in somebody leaving in a delegation, it's the new incumbent that would absorb that particular power, duty and function as holding that particular position. Because there are position title changes from time to time, which is quite common in the organisation, what we do is make sure that we review that with new title changes and bring them back to you as well. We do all of this so that there is no risk that a decision that council makes can not stand to scrutiny, so that if tested in the courts, we can say this person or this position was approved and delegated appropriately in line with the relevant instrument. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Manager. In part, it just strikes me as being, and this has been alluded to by Councillor Grotti, an enormous level of administrative work because officers leave and change all the time. So why it needs to come back to the council, I don't understand. And whether that is indeed a requirement of the Local Government Act or whether we can actually find another way, perhaps just under delegation to the CEO to approve new persons to positions rather than it coming up to council each time.
Through you, I can answer that question. The CEO is not able to delegate powers, duties and functions that comes from explicit legislation, that is a condition and limitation that she cannot do. The council are required to delegate any powers, duties and functions to people within the organisation to positions. So We can't avoid that. Council are the only decision maker and authority that can, particularly in respect to S6. I will note though, just for clarity, there are a host of other instruments of delegation that the CEO does execute under her delegation, because they are administrative and operational in nature and do not require under all of the legislation in S6 or the Local Government Act for that to be delegated. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, well, thank you very much to governance and councillors for this education on delegations. I hope you're finding it very interesting. Now, I will now put the motion. All those in favour? I declare the motion carried. We are now moving on to item 3.4, instrument of appointment to authorise officers under the Planning Environment Act 1987. We're on to 3.4 now. There are no speakers to this item, councillors. There is an officer report before you, as set out on the agenda papers. I'm calling for a motion. Do you have a mover? Councillor Neely, seconded by Councillor Malikan. Would the mover like to speak to them? Seconder? No? Any other councillor? Councillor Grotti, another question.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Now, just to speak to it, to say, look, personally, and I'm confused in this space. I'll be guided by the advice of officers, but I would appreciate a future briefing from the external law firm, if possible. If that needs to be reflected in the resolution, happy to suggest it, CEO, or is that something that can be arranged? Thank you.
That question satisfied? Yep. And we'll now put the motion. All those in favour? I declare the motion carried. We're now moving on to item 3.5, instrument of sub-delegation and appointment and authorisation Environment Protection Act 2017. There are no speakers to this item. Councillors, there's an officer report set out on the agenda papers. If there's no questions, I'm calling for a motion. Do I have a mover? Councillor Neely, seconded by Councillor Malikan. Would the mover like to speak to the item? No. The seconder? No. Any other councillor? No. I will now put the motion. All those in favour? I declare the motion carried. We're now moving on to item 3.6, proposed position on MAV State Council meeting motions, 13th of October 2023, MAV State Council meeting. There are no speakers to this item. Councillors, there's an officer report set out before you on the agenda papers. So I'm calling for a motion. We have a question. Councillor Garotti.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Does this particular resolution bind the council appointed delegate to the MAV, or do they have the authority to be able to vote as they wish at the conference?
I can answer that one, and I'm sure Councillor Malikan might be able to offer some words of wisdom as the council delegate. But as per the resolution of council, the intention there is that Councillor Malikan would vote in accordance with the recommendation or the ultimate resolution detailing his vote for all of the 61 motions, and I believe has expressed intention to do that in previous discussions.
My role at the MAV State Conference is to represent this council, and this council will make a decision tonight on every motion, and I will respect that decision and vote accordingly.
Yeah, I think my question though was not what Councillor Malikan will do or intends to do, and we know he's a great delegate, but does Councillor Malikan have the individual authority to vote as he exercises regardless of the position of council? Just a simple question.
I believe that he could, through you, Mayor, I believe that he could. Whether or not that would be appealing to the council group and stand to scrutiny should that vote be a deciding factor is another story, and I'm not quite sure, not having gone through that particular process with the MAV and that standing to scrutiny, whether that would occur, but for those comments for now, but can certainly take that on notice and seek some advice in relation to that question.
Any further questions? No? Councillor McKern?
The MAV motions are an important indicator of what this council stands for in terms of what we put up for state advocacy. I know I went through this process with the urban food strategy and putting up motions both through the MAV and also at the National Australian Local Government Association conference, and I think we need to be assured what vote is being taken by our delegate on each of these motions. They are important, and I know that Councillor Melican, as our delegate, spends a lot of time at the meetings at the MAV, and thank Councillor Melican for the time he puts in. I think it is also important that we know ahead of time
A question to Councillor Melican.
Yes, it's getting there. Sorry, Mayor. Just what Councillor Melican intends to vote. So, Councillor, could you kindly respond to the question, how is it you're intending to vote, and whether or not you will be consulting with the remaining 8 councillors?
I intend to vote for each one of these motions in exactly the way the officers have reported. The one, I think it's item 37 from Maribyrnong, where the officers are recommending that we don't support that motion. I'll be pushing other delegates to the MAV to actually amend that motion, because I think it's a terrible motion, and I agree with that. So I'll be following exactly what's in this report and voting accordingly. But also I'd like to point out there's a process at the MAV similar to this council that controversial votes or close votes are often, there is a division called, and how people will vote is recorded. And I'm happy for any councillor to go back through every MAV meeting that's ever been, that I've attended, and very happy with, to say that on each of those occasions I have supported this council's policies and strategies. So I think, as I said before, my role at the MAV is to represent this council, not to represent myself and my own views. So I will support every motion that the council officers are recommending we're supporting, and I will vote against this motion in its current form and hope to amend it so it can be something we can all support.
Okay, with no more further questions, I'm calling for a motion. Do I have a mover? Councillor Melican, seconded by Councillor Neely. Would the mover like to speak to the item?
Yeah, I'd actually like to see this council put forward some more motions. I think it's disappointing that we haven't done that, and that's partly my fault, but I think as a council, given what's going on in local government right across Victoria, that it's very important that we actually get involved and put forward motions. Our urban forest strategy, we've put up motions at the last state council, but there's so many different issues that this council faces, and I think we need to get the MAV to advocate on our behalf on many of those. And the planning issues, I think, and there are some in here about the planning issues, but the planning issues facing council and the idea that the state government's blaming council for the fact that there's insufficient housing availability in Melbourne, I think is appalling. And there's so many things we need to address, and we need other councils and the MAV on side to do that. And in my time on the MAV board, I actually pushed that the MAV become more adjective and more, because the relationship between the MAV and the state government is not very good. And if your relationship's no good, there's no point trying to protect that relationship. I think as councils across Victoria, we need to actually stand up for our community. The same people that vote for the state government vote for us, but as local government, we're the people closer, we understand the issues, and the state government to date, I think, has ignored us, and I think the MAV needs to do a much better job of standing up and representing the residents right across Melbourne and right across Victoria. And that's what I've advocated for the whole time I've been involved in the MAV and while I was on the board. So happy to support this, and I'd actually like to thank the officers for their input into this. It's, for a very long time, this council never followed this practice where motions that come up, and would be up to the delegate to make up their mind on every motion and vote accordingly, which I found liberating in some ways, but it's actually puts a big onus on the individual council, and I think it's much better to follow this process where this council agrees on how we should vote on every item, and I think it's a much better system. Other councils do this same practice, and I think it's a real step forward in the way we govern to make sure that this council is more aware of the motions coming to the MOV and aware of the issues and what other councils are thinking. So I think this is a great outcome, and I'd like to thank the officers for taking the time to do this, and I think it's a much better approach to the MOV state councils.
Thank you, councillor. Would the second like to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. There are 61 motions in this report, and they cover the pressing issues like affordable housing, environmental sustainability, the windfall gains tax, better roads, better bus connections, and overall renewal of council assets. There are too many things, too many motions to discuss one by one, and there are really lots of important motions that affect this council. I'd like to just highlight the windfall gains tax. It outlines the issues that affect different councils, particularly rural councils, and they, have land that is fit for housing but is zoned for rural activity instead of rural living. To rezone this, it would trigger the tax, and that would make it really quite unfeasible for new development. This is an issue for Banyule. Councils are planning for projected growth, and there's not only a demand for housing, but a demand for an increase in open space as well. And we know what all the benefits of open space are. So for me, I take this report seriously. These motions are important. I see Councillor Malikan representing us well at the MAV, and the issues are similar and different for different councils across Victoria. And this, shows why they need to be prioritised. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillors? Councillor Grotti.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And look, the reason I wanted to clarify that position is because regarding, what authorities Councillor Malikan has as the delegate, is because we know the MAV State Council proceedings can be dynamic affairs, where amendments can be raised, where alternatives can be raised, and he's got to be able to think on his feet. And I'm very confident to say that as a councillor that, that we've got the right person here for Banyule to be able to represent our position there. I just thought it was important to clarify that, because there might be a couple of votes where Tom or Councillor Malikan needs to make a call. You have my full backing, Tom, in the position that we've elected you to as the MAV delegate to make those calls. And I wish you all the best at the conference. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillors? No, I'll just finish up that there is a lot of work that goes into this. The officers have put the report together and all of the people that provided the information. So thank you for that. I think it's a good task for our staff to understand all of the opportunities that exist and be at the forefront of advocacy. So I think it's a healthy process if incorporated. And also like to thank Councillor Malikan, because I know he spends a tremendous amount of work at the MAV representing our council. So thank you also. I will now put the motion. All those in favour? I declare the motion carried. We are now moving on to item 3.7, record of councillor meetings. There are no speakers on this item. Councillors, there's an officer report before you on the agenda papers. The CEO and chairperson, I am now calling for a motion. Moved Councillor Neely. Seconded Councillor Champion. Would the mover like to speak to the item? Seconded? No? Any other councillor? No? I will now move. Put the motion. All those in favour? I declare the motion carried. We are now moving on to item 4.1, draft Banyule gambling policy for community consultation. There is one speaker on this agenda item, Mr. Kevan Hill from Banyule Ratepayers Action Group, will address council in person and is speaking for the recommendation. Please approach the lectern. You have 2 minutes.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Look, for anybody to say that they weren't in support of a policy like this is would be nuts. But I have some personal experience, not me, but I have some personal experience with this. One of the things that concerns me, though, that there are a number of motherhood statements in this draft, or I'll call it a draft, motherhood statements which I'd like to see tightened up. There is a section on page 37 that talks membership to the Alliance for Gambling Reform attracts an annual cost of $25,000. Benefits include. I'm not quite sure whether you're proposing to join that and whether the $25,000 would be better spent elsewhere, but a question. On page 39, in the first section on the first section, top of the page, gambling impacts will often intersect with family violence, of which the majority of victims are female. The two highlighted, and there's another section there, it says, as women are more likely to work part-time, blah, blah, they may experience. So the two highlighted sections contradict each other. That is, they may experience greater financial harm from gambling, and they will, or they are, the majority of victims of gambling impacts. Now, there's no quantification. It's not quantified. There's no evidence to say that those two statements or assertions are true. So I'd like to see some more evidence to support those sorts of assertions. And on page 40, instead of putting the onus on individual venues should be encouraged to exercise their corporate social responsibility. Well, good luck with that. But I understand there's existing legislation that takes care of that. And I think that the council would be well advised to actually get stuck into it. And I also note that there may be political conflicts involved in trying to make some meaningful changes, particularly places like the Watsonia RSL. So, and I note the Watsonia RSL is per capita in a section called, I think, 7 in terms of its likelihood to have harm, one of the highest spenders per capita. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a question. Councillor Melican.
Can I just have a comment from the Director of Community Programs about the link between problem gamblings and the impact of family violence, etc., on women, and address the question the Speaker?
Thank you, through the Mayor. So the evidence that is out there, it does show that family violence is increased when gambling is involved in a family situation. It can increase the instances of family violence, and primarily women are more significantly impacted by family violence. So that's where that link has been made.
And we have another question, Councillor McKern.
Thank you, Mayor. I believe the Speaker did ask a question about the AGR and the $25,000 membership, and what Council's position is on that. Through you, Mayor, I might ask the Director of Community Wellbeing to respond to that question.
Thank you, Councillor McKern. At this point, we're not a member of AGR, the Alliance for Gambling Reform. As part of the consultation process, we will be talking to the community about, that'll be one part of the consultation, and we will be coming back to Council to make a decision on whether or not Council should be a member of that group.
Thank you. You're satisfied? Any other questions? Councillor De Pasquale.
Mayor, this is, we're voting tonight to bring this to community consultation. How does council have a way to capture that information that was presented at tonight's, from our speaker, Mr. Hill? How are we capturing that, or does he have to make a separate submission, or do one of us councillors have to be conferring that to officers? Thank you.
I'm happy to take that back to our council team that are working on this policy, and we'll make sure that it's recorded as part of our feedback.
If there's no further questions, I'll call for a motion to have a mover. Councillor Grotti, seconded by, there's an alternative recommendation.
I'm happy for you to move,
Councillor McKern, please speak to the alternative.
Yes, thank you. I've put in an alternative, point 4, which notes that the focus of the draft annual gambling policy addresses a change in scope and language from individual responsibility to harm prevention and harm minimisation, shifting the focus to the regulation of systems as a public health issue rather than regulation on individual behaviour. And I'm happy to speak to that, Mayor.
You are speaking to it now. Oh, no, that was the amendment, okay. And seconder, Councillor Grotti, I'm happy to support. As a mover, would you like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to the Speaker, Mr Hill. You're nuts if you're not supportive of this policy. We've heard you, Mr Hill. I welcome this report on the draft Banyule gambling policy for community consultation because, as has been mentioned, gambling is big business and growing globally. Recent stats show Australians as the biggest gamblers in the world, with losses totalling $18.38 billion in 1 year. And just to give you some degree of comparison, Singapore was second with losses of $5.9 billion. Huge discrepancy. The problem with gambling, as reading the reports will inform us, is its association with serious harm. Mayor, including depression, anxiety, family violence, bankruptcy, suicide ideation and suicide. Addressing gambling is very much in line with Banyule's council plan to work with relevant partners to enhance health and wellbeing outcomes and social cohesion. I believe, Mayor, that it's therefore right that Banyule Council acknowledge and have a policy position addressing this growing societal problem, especially in relation to electronic gaming machines, otherwise known as pokies, and online gambling. The draft policy for Banyule states that the greatest amount of harm in our community comes from pokies and online gambling. It's interesting that in a statewide report of the 79 Victorian councils, Banyule Council ranked 25th for total gambling losses in the last financial year. Yet, we lost more than $57 million in EGM losses in the last financial year. The biggest losses being in pokey venues based in Heidelberg, Ivanhoe and Watsonia respectively, which was partially alluded to by the Speaker. Addressing gambling is a complex yet necessary task requiring intervention from all levels of government. There's no way that local government can do this alone. The role council has to play: advocacy, planning permits and regulatory controls, lease and licensing agreements, education, banning gambling-related advertising on council-owned and managed building, and contributing to research. The reason for the alternative motion is to drive home the importance of a paradigm shift that needs to occur in the gambling industry and civil society regarding traditional assessment of burden focused on categorising and measuring problem gambling. The focus has been on problem gamblers rather than on the harm caused by gambling. Very convenient for the pro-gambling lobby group. So to this end, really support the thinking that we need to focus on a paradigm shift away from the individual to a focus on the harm, and look forward to the feedback from the community, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Would the second like to speak to the item?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Look, Council has at the moment an existing relatively strong policy, and obviously this is now an opportunity to strengthen and build upon that. One thing that I'm proud of that we enacted in the previous policy was to ban any form of gambling advertising on any council-owned leased facility in this city. So football clubs, soccer clubs, community groups, sporting clubs, etc., they are not able to advertise or have any advertising associated with gambling on their facilities. We know that gambling losses from EGMs are significant in Banyule, and we have the data to support that. One of the observations I think that we see in the policy and through the officer report is the growth in online and sport-based gambling. We've previously received a presentation at the councillor level. I believe one of the banks is able to generate spend data, de-identified spend data, and it'd be fascinating if we're able to tap into that to get an understanding of sporting gambling losses within our community. So just a suggestion there for the officers. Our speaker touched on a really important point earlier though in reference to the Watsonia RSL, but we in fact have 4 RSLs, as I'm aware, in Banyule, and RSLs do a tremendous job and are a pillar and a fabric of our community. Unfortunately, all 4 in our community do rely for a significant share of their revenue from pokies. So this is something that we're going to have to work with them on, not against them, to help transition and develop their business models and to reduce that reliance. Because while they're doing great work, on one hand, we know the destructive element of pokies. So I think that's just something that we've got to consider as a council as we take this forward. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, councillor. Do we have any other councillors that'd like to speak to the item? Councillor Melican.
Yeah, thank you very much. The report actually talks about the fact that gambling losses have gone down from poker machines. Well, if you look at the latest stats that have just come out yesterday, that's not true. Victoria, we lost over $3 billion in the last financial year, which is now 13% above the last year pre-COVID. So we've gone well beyond what we were losing pre-COVID. I know COVID had a massive impact on poker machines gambling, but it's gone back to well above that. So that's a real concern. And as we heard, the impact on individuals and the impact on our community is massive. I know the government, state government makes a lot of money out of this, and I know the RSLs see it as a source of revenue. But if you look at the harm it does compared to the money it generates, and the number of jobs it generates, it is simply an unsustainable industry that costs the community a huge amount, and particularly on individuals. Must give some credit to the state government. They have now proposed some changes. The biggest change is they're now going to force poker machine venues to close between 4 a.m. and 10 a.m, which is a massive step forward. But 4 a.m, like if you can't sell alcohol at 4 a.m. in the morning unless you've got a pokies venue. So, and we've had arguments in this chamber about whether we let a bar stay open till 12 o'clock or 2 o'clock, and yet pokey venues can stay open till 4 a.m, or once this new law comes in. Currently they can stay open longer, but anyway, I better move on. And as for the Alliance, I think we need to be in the Alliance. They've put the ones that have put pressure on AFL clubs to get out of gambling. They're the ones that have done the research. They're the ones that are now tackling the ongoing online gambling issue. But gambling advertising is such at epidemic points, and that's what's influencing our next generation. So very happy to support this tonight. I think it's going out to the public. It is a great outcome and something we desperately need to do in Australia.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillors? Councillor Neely.
Thank you, Mayor. I read an article in the paper that mentioned Australian children as young as 10 are addicted to gambling, and it originates from attractive, bright online video games. More and more young people are facing depression and anxiety alongside debt because of gambling in youth. The dopamine receptors work in young people as well as old, feeling some reward when gambling. And that's very important to me that we address this. This draft policy highlights a preventative public health approach specific to Banyule community. It covers responsibility, advocacy, planning, health promotion, and community support. So, you know, electronic gaming machine losses, as Council mentioned, they're still high. Whether they're a little bit lower, a little bit higher from year to year, they're still high. Online gambling is such a beast. I couldn't think of another word other than that. It's hard to tame. It's hard to gather timely and accurate data. And we don't know, simply don't know how much people are clicking online, adults and youth. Seeking public consultation on this is really important. The more data Banyule Council can collect, the more informed, therefore leading to more targeted action, and that's what we need to protect those who are vulnerable to harm. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillors? No, I'd just like to note that there's significant work that's gone into this document in the review process. It's taken some time to come through council, and we did significant due diligence as a group of councillors as well, and invited the the Alliance for Gambling Reform to come and do a presentation to us, just to make sure that they're going to deliver if we are to become members. And so we had that review, and I think there was a very good argument they put forward towards councillors, and I think we agreed with a lot of the work they were doing was of value. So I'd just like to note that. And look, it's shocking what happens with gambling in our community. Just to think that over $50 million in Banyule alone goes into electronic gaming machines. That's a dreadful drain on our community. Absolutely shocking. And I think it's surprising that people bet when they know, or we know that they're going to lose. So I'm not sure why that happens, and I think it can only come down to health. So I'm deviating a bit much into personal views here, but I think it's an awful environment that we'd be better off without. So I'm looking forward to the public consultation. We're going to take it to the broader community through Shaping Banyule, through the committees at council. We're going to have an industry planning meeting, and also one with the community in person as well. So it's going out for the next 6 weeks. With that, I will now put the motion. Oh, yep, and a right reply.
Yep, thank you. Thanks, Mayor, and thanks to all the councillors for their comments. I just wanted to, the right of reply to touch on what a couple of councillors mentioned, RSLs and their reliance on pokies. I might also point out that quite a number of football clubs have developed a reliance on pokies, and yet it's a worthy opportunity to express that one football club back in 2008, when pokies became de rigueur, made the conscientious social justice decision not to invest in pokies. North Melbourne developed the Huddle and organised themselves with a CEO to look at alternative investments for the club. It meant that they were on a losing streak for quite a while, but with the fullness of time, they have broken even by investing in sustainable forms of raising funds for the club. So I think that's an example that is important to raise as one that shows that sustainable opportunities are available. We just need to be committed in setting up the frameworks to make it happen. We don't have to invest in pokies. North Melbourne Football Club has shown how you can fundraise sustainably without actually damaging our community. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. And with that, I now put the motion. All those in favour? I declare the motion carried. We're now moving on to item 5.1, Urban Forest Strategy 2022-2032. There are 3 speakers to this item this evening. First up is Michelle Jarvis from Friends of Banyule, who will be addressing the audience in person and is speaking for the recommendation. You have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Michelle Jarvis. I'm speaking on behalf of Friends of Banyule. We support the urban forest strategy, but it needs to be strengthened and it needs to be adequately resourced. The urban forest strategy principle number 5, we protect and enhance Banyule's natural environment to care for flora and fauna, and should also include biodiversity. The urban forest strategy and the biodiversity strategy plan are inextricably linked, and they should work in concert, not from differing viewpoints on tree value. Biodiversity is in the strategic focus area, but it should also be a principle, and it should be a principle that the whole of council aspires to and is aware of, including in its own planning decisions. Friends of Banyule welcomes the adjustment of the draft KPI to have 30% canopy cover across all suburbs by 2050, noting that this is up from 27% in the draft. We also support the building and maintaining of partnerships with other protection and management authorities, and that's absolutely essential. Reliance on the Victorian Government data of vegetation extent this 2014 and 2018 data doesn't seem good enough. In the 5 years from 2018, we've seen massive canopy loss from both private and state developments. And data set released in 2021, the Vic Map 2021, I think it doesn't seem good enough and or is out of date already, as it doesn't include losses, or doesn't appear to include losses associated with NELP, LXRP, or the Victorian School Building Authority. We must have an accurate canopy assessment because we cannot improve what we don't measure. 2023 planting season is over. We must commence delivering on and resourcing the action items now, and it's worth considering that we educate, inform and incentivise private property owners
Could you
and
please sum up?
developers to retain trees on site. I'll just 30 seconds. We cannot achieve the targets without private owners buying into the policy. I did have a bit more, but I'll stop there.
Thank you. Next up, we have Jane Crone, who will address council in person and is speaking for the recommendation. Jane, please approach the lectern. You have 2 minutes.
And 2 minutes is never enough, thank you. Now, there are many residents much more qualified than myself to speak tonight, and that concerns me that I'm sort of here having to do it. Council's earlier draft statement that people are aware and value the role of urban forests is, I think, doubtful due to the disappointing lack of engagement tonight. I thought there was only 2 speakers. I gather there's a third one because when I put my name down, there was only 2 of us and it was nearly 10 o'clock. Council is to be commended for the amount of work carried out to produce this huge document and attachments, much of which is most commendable. But I feel that many of its worthwhile aims are unattainable due to a wide variety of reasons. Space cannot be provided to support any significant greening and large canopy trees. This was in your draft. This is what you wanted because of the pressure that the council is under from the state government to supply a huge amount of high density, low income and affordable housing. I've been to all of those talks, but there's no room for vegetation here with this type of development. Res code has always been a problem that allows boundary to boundary French provincial McMansions. No room for substantial vegetation here. Vegetation loss in the private realm is alarming, and with no substantial fines or punishment available, it will continue at the alarming rate. Now, there's been articles in the paper how much we are losing in suburbs, and the heat bank is incredible. How can council fulfil its goals and commitments when we are on the verge of a new scary housing policy? Now, I know there are a lot of people that need to be housed, but in doing this, we're losing a lot of vegetation. Council's only able to plant in nature strips and parks. It's really only a street tree policy because we have no control over the loss in the suburban backyards, front yards. And we've got vandalism and theft of newly planted trees. It's a huge problem for the council. I would, however, like to see more regular watering and better spacing of some trees, especially if the placement is under a private property tree. Also, native Indigenous alongside already existing and exotics in different areas where they have been historically already provided. Example, Eaglemont, the Bunya Bunya pines. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have John Fordham, who will address council in person and speaking for the recommendation. Thank you. You've got 2 minutes.
Mayor. Clock's not running yet. In order for the urban, I've had a brief look at the urban tree strategy, and I'm for it, of course. In order for the urban strategy to be adhered to, I believe the following measure could be a valuable amendment or addition to it. For some time now, council have used the idea of fining developers and others for careless or deliberate tree removal so as to increase the yield on their property by being able to have more dwellings than would otherwise be allowed due to tree retention. It seems continually these fines are brushed aside with the developer or other, paying the fine and continuing on as though nothing has occurred. It seems, however, that whatever the fine is imposed, it's merely added onto the cost of the development for the purchaser to pay. As we're in the Green Wedge of Melbourne and with the Yarra Central to this, it seems that policies, flexible, evolving policies, should be central to the existence of maintenance and further development of the Green Wedge of Melbourne. The ecosystem services that trees provide cannot be underestimated. Therefore, we have a responsibility to protect all that we have, which should be the mantra for the green wedge policies to be developed. If fines are not working, then other approaches need to be considered. One option would be to have the developer or others, putting in a pool or an extension, place a bond with the council, and that bond can be used for any fines that the council deems pertinent to breaches and conditions consistent with the permit granted. Such fines would be substantive along with the loss of percentage of the bond. A second infringement would see a greater loss of the bond money and more substantive fines. Further, I believe that council are losing the opportunity to further fund some of their conservation programs or indeed capital raising. Once a developer or person, say putting in a pool or lake, where the trees are involved, it might be merely an extension a council officer could be able to do on their land and inspect that the trees are in good condition and that all that is met before them meets the Australian standard. That could be part of the planning process, whereby someone can visit the tree at any time. I believe such measures could be a teeth and tool that the council could embrace. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We have a question for the speaker. Mr. Fordham, would you please come back to the speaker? We've got a question for you. Yes.
Thank you for your statement, Mr. Fordham. Both yourself and the previous speaker alluded to the need to protect our existing green infrastructure, our existing trees, as well as new plantings. You mentioned tree bonds. Do you know of situations where they've been implemented and do work?
Yes, there's a couple of examples. My understanding is the City of Knox have landscape bonds that are implemented, whereby the developer posts a bond, and once that landscape is met by the developer, council sign off it as long as it's consistent with what was put in the planning permit. And the other council that does this too, specifically for trees, is Melbourne City Council. I had that from Greg Moore this afternoon and I rang regarding this matter. You know, I've both sat on the council's committees for significant trees for some years now. We've put them on their local register.
So if I've heard correctly, Mayor and Mr. Fordham, the implementation of bonds is not a new concept in local government.
That's right, yeah. So I guess the thing is to run around and find out from perhaps the MAV what other councils are taking such bond measures to keep this development tree loss, as in Burundara some weeks ago. We discovered they were cutting down trees at night, or we don't want that here, or no council will want that. What measures can we then implement, such as I've suggested, to ensure that this may not happen here?
Thank you very much, Mr. Fordham.
Okay.
Thank you. Now we've got an additional question.
For the Director of City Development.
Yes.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director. In light of what our speakers have expressed in relation to illegal tree removals, do we have any statistics on illegal tree removals happening in Banyule?
Through you, Mayor, I don't have any statistics with me tonight. I would have to take that question on notice.
That would be appreciated. But can you confirm, Director, that it does happen in Banyule, or is Banyule the perfect municipality?
No, I can confirm that tree removal does occur unlawfully in Banyule, and to that extent, Council has a wide range of enforcement powers that they do undertake. Those would include fines. We've had recent success at the Magistrates Court with prosecutions, and also through planning agreements, effectively quarantining land on sites for replanting and prohibiting development from that. So there's a range of methods that we do have in place.
If there's no further questions, I'll now be calling for a motion, and I believe there is an amended recommendation. Councillor McKern, would you like to speak to that?
Mayor, We have a number of alternatives placed in on the screen. They're in pink. The first being, firstly, to acknowledge and thank the Community Reference Group and Banyule Environment and Climate Action Advisory Group Committee, that should read, and include this acknowledgement at the beginning of the Urban Forest Strategy for 2023 to 2033. And that going down to point 6, that council request officers investigate the potential of tree bonds to protect trees on development sites as an effective enforcement tool, which could ultimately include a trial implementation, and request that an officer report detailing the investigation activities be presented back to council at a future meeting. I would like to say, Mayor, if it's possible, I'd like to tighten that future meeting with a more succinct timeline. So if I could foreshadow a change, an amendment to that, to a more succinct timeline.
Would you like to put a date?
I think within the next 6 to 12 months, befitting a potential trial period. And
Sorry, Mayor, can it be increased on the screen also for the benefit of our public gallery? Thank you, Mayor.
and the last point, are we ready? That council requests that officers investigate the consideration of rating incentives for residents that have gardens that contribute significantly to the urban forest through the review of council's 2023 to 2027 revenue and rating strategy. There's also an amendment to point 5, refers the resource requirements of the proposed urban forest strategy 2023 to 2033 to the 24-25 budget process. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Melican. Would the mover like to speak to the item?
I'd like to thank the speakers who spoke tonight. I think they brought up pertinent points, and hopefully with the fullness of time, these points will be addressed successfully. Because what's amounted to essentially 2 to 3 years worth of work, including community consultation, this is the culmination of our efforts. The second draft or the second urban forest strategy for Banyule, and it will guide our tree planting for the next 10 years. To put this in context, Mayor, urbanised areas around the world have urban forest strategies. They're not new. And because of the globally recognised importance of urban forests, we're seeing them on the increase. It used to be that urban forest strategies were largely an amenity matter, not anymore. Now they're a matter of public health, cooling our streets, open spaces and our yards, and managing the effects of urban heating, exacerbated by global warming, has become a priority issue for governments around the world. The ultimate aim is to increase the number of trees planted to achieve a 30% canopy cover by 2050. Currently, only one suburb in Banyule exceeds that 30% target, and that's Eaglemont. And I can see a few gestures there of delight. However, suburbs including Bundoora, Belfield and Heidelberg Heights have under half the desired target, straddling between 10 to 15% canopy cover. And that's where I think this strategy is strong. It identifies the weaknesses in our canopy cover and where we have to be prioritising action. My main focus this evening was really around retaining our green infrastructure where we already have it. We can talk about planting new trees, and that's important, but it requires enormous resourcing. What we also need to focus on, equally important, is retaining what we have. And we know that we're losing most of our canopy trees on private development sites. Much more has to be done. Magistrate courts appearances, in my opinion, are relatively minimal and require enormous resource investment to happen. I think the idea of the tree bonds is something that has merit, and given what our last speaker has spoken to, should be considered seriously by council and by our officers charged with returning to us a report. Why is it important that we look at these bonds, Mayor? Because it's a mechanism requiring a land developer to deposit a certain amount of money with the local authority during development. The advantage of tree bonds is that they place the onus of proof of retention on developers rather than the onus of proof of removal on local councils. Thus, if a tree is removed, the mechanism is already in place to monitor, i.e. the developer needs to demonstrate that the tree is not only still there, but in good shape, and penalise. The financial penalty is already with the enforcing body. I look at people in the gallery and I can see the penny is dropping. Stonington are looking at this. We've heard our speaker this evening saying City of Melbourne has already implemented it. We know that councils around Melbourne have had landscape bonds. Bonds are not new concepts in local government. So I welcome, Mayor, the opportunity to trial tree bonds and hope that the report coming back to council will be supportive.
Thank you, councillor. Would the seconder like to speak to the item?
Yes, I will say a few things. Thanks very much. I'd like to also thank the staff for their efforts in this. I've been to a few of the consultation meetings and they've done an excellent job to, well, don't tell me the clock's not working. It's disastrous. Anyway,
take advantage of it, Tom.
And we talk a lot about climate change and the heat island impact on people, and that's, if you look at heat stroke right across the world, that is the biggest killer of people, more than floods, more than fires. Heat stroke is a massive impact on many people, and this council has declared a climate emergency. So at what stage do we actually start doing things? As we've heard, we're losing more trees than we're gaining, and the trees we're gaining are tube stocks, small trees. So we lose a canopy tree and we plant a new one. We think we've balanced things out. It takes 50 years to get to some of the stage of these trees. And then I look at the impact the North East Link's having on us. Beautiful trees all through the army camp. Some are 300 years old. They're all gone. They're all gone. So, and we talk about the development sites. Well, I understand that, but it's not a choice between whether we have development and have sufficient housing and trees. We can do it. There are cities in the world that have achieved higher density developments and still maintain beautiful public places where people are happy to be. That's what we're missing out. So I don't see that we need to have increase our housing stock and be at the expense of our natural environment. Who wants to live in a tree-free place where the heat island effect is massive and there's nowhere decent to sit down and meet and talk to your friends? We can do both. So I don't understand that. But we need to get the ball rolling as quickly as possible. And I think I would like to see a future report come to this council where we can actually start implementing this, because the time period to plant trees is shrinking. The droughts that are coming are going to have a massive impact on that, and we need to do more and we need to do it quickly. So happy to support this tonight. I hope the residents do. It is disappointing there's not many people more in the gallery, but hopefully when we adopt it, they'll be here.
Thank you, councillor. Do any other councillors wish to speak to the item? Councillor Neely.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to reiterate a few of the comments. The canopy cover targets in this report are very important targets, as we know that trees are not only valuable for aesthetics, but residents can enjoy the cool shade that the trees provide. We know that asphalt and concrete magnify the heat. And as the report states, planting trees requires investment. Creating more green spaces is good for health, it's good for well-being. Beautiful green areas encourage walking, cycling. You can go along our beautiful Plenty River Trail in Banyule, among other physical activity. Banyule's committed to planting trees in the right places at the right time and moving forward and acknowledging the North East Link road network, Banyule needs to work hard to counteract the heat island effect and plan for where the new trees will go. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillors? Councillor Garotti.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to firstly acknowledge your role in bringing this about, this strategy, and also as well, Councillor McKern. But really, you know, the two of you, the leadership that you brought to the council on this issue, and I think in particular you, Mayor, like you've really driven this one. And it's a great strategy, it's forward thinking, it's about infrastructure. Trees are infrastructure and they deliver enormous benefit to the community. I think Councillor McKern really highlighted the benefit of trees as infrastructure a couple of meetings back, and that's really resonated with me. So I just really wanted to call out and highlight the really good work that you've done in particular, and Councillor McKern, in taking this through to the council. Look, I'm excited about the strategy. You know, as has been covered, you know, there is a relative absence of tree coverage in the north of the city, and this certainly provides an opportunity to address that over the longer term. And I suppose as well, though, that from a practical perspective, we've also been able to address you know, some deficiencies in existing process through the strategy. So on occasion, there is a need to remove trees, problem trees. And we had a case in the Grimshaw ward recently where a tree caused massive flooding for a resident, and the process was unclear on how to deal with that. This strategy now provides that clarity. Final point is that this strategy also provides an opportunity to engage our community, and in particular our scout clubs, to really drive some of this work in the city. And in Bundoora, actually, we were very successful in doing a whole range of tree plantings along the power line easement, obviously appropriate height trees. But let's get out to our communities, let's get out to our scouts and really drive this strategy. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillor? Councillor De Pasquale.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I'm a bit confused with regards to the extra items in the proposal tonight, or the motion tonight, because I'm not adverse to the urban forest strategy per se, although when we get down to the nitty-gritty of it, I think a lot more community members will have a lot more questions as we continue to go through, because as far as I can tell, the urban forest strategy isn't just 30% coverage of public space. It could also be thought of as 30% coverage of urban forest in private properties as well. So where do we find that space? The way that, even our speaker mentioned tonight, the way that developments are these days, the way that planning is these days, we're building fence to fence, there's no room to plant trees, and that's a problem in itself. But as we get to the north, particularly the north of our municipality, I think many residents will have some quite adverse thoughts with regards to such a strategy, and be quite critical, because where will they be able to plant these trees? How will we be able to implement this forest strategy when we're effectively putting units or dwellings, you know, at some times within 250 square metres, and that's what's all that's needed for a development. I don't know. So it's quite easy to do it in the south here. You know, Ivanhoe, Eaglemont. You know, we've got big blocks, huge blocks here. Just plant some more trees, no problem. But for those areas where they're really small and tight, and you know, we're trying to get people into homes, and our young into homes, and we're trying to, you know, make sure we have homes for, you know, single parents, or, you know, people who are, you know, victims of domestic violence and have to move out and have to rent or have to do something. How are we going to provide that for our community if we continue to put these encumbrances on properties? Not only that, I'm unsure about bonds. I don't know how they work. I need more information. Rates, giving properties rate relief if they've got tree cover. I mean, that's not going to happen in the north of a municipality. I'm very confused about this whole strategy and the amount of information in it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillors wish to?
Yes, Mayor. Just to the
Demorose?
mover, could we make an amendment to point 7, instead of saying request, note that council would like officers to investigate the consideration of the rating incentive in the revenue and rating strategy when it comes up, if that's okay by the mover and the seconder.
Question back to Councillor De Morelos. Councillor De Morelos, in your opinion, what difference will that make in terms of the response we receive?
For me, councillor, I don't feel it comfortable to request officers to investigate it. I would like it noted and it to come up with the revenue and rating strategy next year, because I feel like that's probably more correct for me.
Correct.
It's okay, if you don't feel like it, then I will foreshadow a recommendation with 0.7 dropped off.
I'd prefer to stay with it, if that's okay, Mayor. Because otherwise, I don't see that it may necessarily be addressed unless through you, the director can provide some assurance that we have this particular item 0.7 adequately addressed if we change the word from request to notes.
Put that question to Mark.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. I don't think it really makes a difference other than the fact that we would go through a process as we do every year of reviewing the revenue rating plan, and as an opportunity for councillors to provide input into that plan as well as the community. And we'll go through a community consultation process. So notes is perfectly okay if that's okay with the mover.
How do you feel about that, Mayor?
Yeah, I'm happy with that if we bring more councillors on board, if that's what's required.
All right. Looks like we'll still get an adequate response, which I think the Mayor was looking for. It was a point that he raised.
Thank you.
The seconder, Councillor Malikan, is that?
I think it's too important of a strategy to argue about one word, and I'm happy to accept that amendment, but yeah, it's too important a strategy, and I think during the rating strategy debate, we'll be able to discuss it anyway, so yeah, happy to have that amendment.
Any other councillor wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Champion.
Thanks, Mayor. This is a very challenging item for a variety of reasons. I regularly have the opportunity of hearing new residents, certainly in the northern end of Banyule and into Nillumbik, say they move here, they move to here, they move into Banyule, they move into Nillumbik from inner suburbs because they love the trees and the space. And that already tells me that we are green and we care for our natural environment. And it is different from other parts of Melbourne. The challenge comes when people move here because they love the trees. They're just not so keen on the trees in their own backyard that overhang their roofs. And the branch looks like, potentially, might fall on their back room, their child's bedroom. What do you do? So our officers as well as our residents, our newer residents, are very challenged by these beautiful trees which survive in our environment or don't survive in our environment or live with us. So while I am supportive absolutely of the urban forest strategy, the way this is written now, I am supportive of this. I am very conscious that we have community members who won't support this and do rely on us to speak for them on their behalf as an individual, possibly against this. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillors? Yeah, all right, it's my turn now. I'd just like to congratulate all the people that contributed to this. We did a community reference group. We even invited people that didn't want a tree in front of their home because we went to the extra length to make sure all views could be heard. We went to all the committees, our staff, were quite upset, I think, at times that we delayed it and made sure we kept increasing the consultation levels, because this is such an important part of our future of Banyule. And I think this is the last of the 3 big environmental strategies that we needed to get right in Banyule. We did climate change, we then did waste, and now it's the urban forest. And I think those 3 are the 3 absolutely big critical pieces of work that we needed to get right in Banyule to lay down the groundwork for a good environmental outcome. So I'd just like to thank everyone for their contributions, and at times it might have been frustrating, the level of scrutiny that our community, as tonight, they're always pushing for better, and I'm glad that you all were in support for, but you did identify weaknesses and risks, and there absolutely is in this plan. And some of the amendments tonight speak to the greatest risk that I think a few councillors think about, which is in the private realm. We have less control in that, and it's more difficult, as Councillor De Pasquale noted. We're not going to make each property do 30%, but we're going to look at a strategy to enable a more fair distribution of vegetation so that everyone can receive the benefits. And there is a strong correlation between the value of properties and the amount of trees. And when we look at those with most trees in Banyule, they're the areas that are highest value. So I think it's very important that we get this right, and I think tonight we've come a long way on the journey. Significant changes have been made as we did our public consultation, and I think we've been getting a number of positive responses from all that work and effort that's gone into this. And I think it's been a couple of years until this come out the other end, and I'm very grateful for all the work that's gone in and the budget allocations that we will need to discuss, and that will make this a successful strategy moving forward. With that, I think there's a right of reply.
Firstly, very well said as a sum up, Mr Mayor. I think it's important to note the process we've been through. As I mentioned earlier, this has been years in the making. We have deferred adoption of this strategy because there is so much complexity to it. And as mentioned by the Mayor in response to one of the councillors' comments, it's important that we understand that we're not talking about putting 30% worth of trees on each property. It doesn't work like that. It's a target for the overall municipality, which is a target that covers public and the private realm. We need to bear in mind that Melbourne is losing 1 to 1.5% of its canopy trees every year. We used to be called the garden state. Now people refer to us as the compost state. I think that Banyule is taking a responsible approach to this strategy. Speakers tonight have noted perhaps some of the things that we could have done stronger, but overall there's a precedent here for planting more canopy and planting it in a responsible manner. And I'd like to thank all the councillors who've contributed to this evening's discussion, because I think it shows a balanced view towards the strategy. We're not here as councillors just backslapping each other or the strategy and the hard work that's gone into it. We're aware of some of the nuances and some of the shortfalls, and we'll be no doubt addressing each and every one of them as they arise. But what we have in front of us now is a document that we should all look forward to supporting as well as we can to meet that 30% cover. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, councillors. I now then put the motion. All those in favour? And against? Abstain?
Yes, Mayor, I reserve my right to abstain from voting.
Okay, noted. I declare the motion carried. We're now moving into item 6.1, Transport Advocacy Update. There are 2 speakers to this item this evening. First up, we have Michelle Jarvis from Friends of Banyule, who will address the council in person and speaking for the recommendation. Michelle, please approach the lectern. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of Friends of Banyule. I'm speaking about the Transport Advocacy Project list, and I just wanted to note that NALP needs to be a priority. Item 22 refers to walking and cycling paths and refers to NELP. We need to have better integration with the NELP project. We need to be doing this now. The urban design and landscape plan is out today. We've got 21 days to comment on it, and it's saying more about that later. 38, upgrade the unsafe, steep, slippery and flood-prone section of the main Yarra Trail at the underpass of Banksia Street Bridge. NELP is a major stakeholder with massive works planned for this stretch of road, and it should be a priority that NELP pays for. So we need to be advocating for that now. Shared user path, item 45, the shared user path to link Banksia Park to Heidi and Heidi to the Heidelberg Activity Centre is really desirable. Also critical is item 54, to upgrade Watsonia Station so that it is DDA compliant. Stakeholder that must be included in this is NELP. The community are expecting that with all the massive works and changes around the station, that we will have a DDA compliant Watsonia Station, but it is outside the NELP project scope, and so that we need to ensure that this is delivered. I understand the difficulties of dealing with NELP, but every effort must be made to ensure that folk with disabilities, crutches, wheelchairs, mothers with prams, etc. can utilise the station. Item 70, the grade separation at Ruthven Street, Chapman Street. Council should be advocating for residents in the environment to minimise the tree loss debacle that occurs with every other state government project.
Could you please sum up?
Well, I had a couple of others, but I would just sum up by saying that council should be advocating for residents now, particularly in relation to the NELP project with unsafe roads around Greensborough Highway and the impact of dust, construction dust and cement dust that is impacting the roads now. Also the impact of residents being able to access their properties by construction workers parking in the local streets.
Thank you.
Will only get worse with the Northern Works. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, we have Mr. Kevin Hill from Banyule Ratepayers Action Group, who will address the council in person and is against the recommendation. Could you please approach the lectern? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. Look, I want to be for it, but there's some things in here that I think that we should think about. First of all, the premise of this whole advocacy is that we give the highest priority to those projects that are of high need, I don't know what that means, but of low likelihood of being delivered. That seems to be the reverse order of most, or the most common way you go about doing things. You'd go after the low-hanging fruit and get a result. Now, I'm going to morph this a little bit from transport to the road management of this council, because all of these things look like costing a fair bit of money. I haven't got a costing on them yet, but I'm sure that'll come out. But of the 72 projects that are listed here, 64% of them relate to walking and cycling, 33% relate to public transport, and 3% relate to road network. Now, there's something going on when 64% of the community says it needs walking and cycling. I'm not quite sure about people over 50 and 60 about cycling. Maybe they walk a lot, but it doesn't sort of ring to me that this is right. It seems to me that there's a bit of politics going on here. Some pet projects maybe, some ideologies, I'm not quite sure. But quite frankly, given the council's cash-starved, and I'm not making that up, I think that's now a commonly known factor, I would have thought the council would be putting its hard-earned cash that it's got and cash that it might get to things like repairing the roads and footpaths. Now, it says in here that these are state government-sponsored things, but I'm sure if you went to the state government and said, look, you know, our needs are far greater here than they are there, they'd be amenable to change. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, councillors, there's an officer report before you. We have a question?
Yeah, Mayor, I did have a question. Just with many other strategies, and urban forest is a really good example, we have a community consultation opportunity where we go out to the community and we consult. And I'm just wondering, is that occurred with regard to this transport advocacy list? If not, why not? And what are the opportunities to engage our community in this process? Thank you, Mayor.
Put the question to the Director for City Developments.
Thank you. My understanding is that the integrated transport plan and the advocacy list were consulted on and the views of the community were sought. The updates that are being sought through the current paper that's tabled before you recognises those parts of the infrastructure that have already been delivered, so they've dropped off the list, and other priority matters that formed part of that consultation have gone on the list. So yes, consultation was undertaken to develop this list. As to whether this list itself has been recently consulted, I don't believe so.
Without any further questions, I will now, there is an officer report set out on the agenda papers, and I'm calling for a motion. Do we have a mover? Councillor Garotti? Oh, there's a slight amendment. Well, would you like to offer that to Councillor Melican? Would you like to move this? Is this your amendment? Councillor McKern?
Mayor, I have a query for the mover, if that be okay.
Councillor Melican?
I'm wondering if the mover might be open to a further amendment on point 4 that council write to the Honourable Minister, as well as the appropriate opposition spokesperson to request respective meetings. Would that be agreeable to the mover? If that be it, then yes, I think that would be appropriate if agreeable to the mover.
Do we have a seconder? Yeah, if you could reread that. Can we, before we ask for a seconder, I'll wait for that to be up on the screen.
Yep, the Shadow Minister for Active Transport. Oh, public transport. And do you want Matthew Guy mentioned? Yep.
I believe that might be the Honourable Matthew Guy.
I'll now seek a seconder. Councillor McKern. We have a question? Councillor.
May I'm just trying to work out what the change to Project 52 makes to the document that is now being proposed to be adopted, and not what effect does that have to community consultation, etc. Just the appropriate officer, please.
Could I ask the appropriate officer to answer that one?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Number 52 was currently drafted in the attachment, spoke to improving the accessibility of the Ivanhoe Rail Station, including replacing the existing pedestrian bridge. We understand there are a range of heritage matters that might exist with that pedestrian bridge, and it may well be that the best alternative could include retention of it as well as augmentation or addition of other accessibility measures. So we agree that it would probably be fruitful to not lock in removal of the pedestrian bridge as the only solution that could be considered.
Are there any other further questions? No? I'll move to...
So I'm very unclear. Does that mean that that has to go through further community consultation? Because I'd hate the residents of Ivanhoe and the users of our public transport system to somehow be amongst an issue with regards to how that process could just be done without their knowledge, or?
I'll put that to the relevant officer.
Yeah, through you, Mayor, my understanding is that the broad community feedback was that accessibility issues at Ivanhoe were the most pressing concern, and they felt as a consequence that that pedestrian bridge was the main encumbrance to any accessibility improvements. Because of its heritage listing, it was difficult to modify and therefore became a barrier or a reason why good access couldn't be provided. But I think we're firmly of the view that you can achieve both outcomes. Not suggesting for a minute that wouldn't be expensive, but there would be other ways to create accessibility at the station other than just removing that pedestrian bridge.
So the question is, in Project 50 that doesn't actually mention to remove the bridge. So obviously, if something gets removed, we've got to have access to both sides of a platform or both sides of a station. What then would be implemented if something is removed? Because I can't see the word remove in the attachments or in the recommendation tonight.
Through you, Mayor, the wording is including replacing the existing pedestrian bridge. And it was considered, and I would agree that it sounds a bit like a fait accompli, that replacement would be the only option. Sorry, I used the word removal, it would be replacement. But in fact, it could be that that pedestrian bridge is retained and an alternative access provided in addition.
Be satisfied?
I wouldn't say satisfied, but no further questions. Thank you.
Would you like to change the wording, Councillor McKern?
Di Pasquale's comments and the confusion, I can understand that because including providing also suggests the possibility of replacement. So should we be making that clearer is my question through you, Mayor, to the Director about around the possibility of retaining the bridge and making it DDA compliant.
Through you, Mayor, I'm satisfied with the wording that has been drafted. It looks at the concept of providing a DDA compliant pedestrian bridge. It doesn't rule out the fact that the existing bridge could be considered for removal, it could be considered for adaptation, preserved in time, and other alternatives.
Point of order.
I think we're probably
It's a suggestion for the
outcome.
Point of order, Mayor. It's a suggestion to the mover if he wants to make the amendment, not a director, no offence, director. But if you want to change the wording, Councillor, I believe the mover was Councillor Mulligan, it should be requested to him.
Through you, I was just seeking clarification as to whether it was required, because there's no point changing anything if it's understood what it is we're trying to achieve, Mayor.
Okay, all right. I think the mover and seconder are happy with it as is. With that, I'll ask the mover if they'd like to speak to the item first.
Yeah, why is this important? Well, as we know, transport is such an integral part of the way we live our daily lives. It influences where we work, it influences who we socialise with, influences our recreation, our sporting, influences our family engagement, it influences everything in our lives. And it's very important to get it right. And I'll speak to some of the comments that here. What sort of behaviour do we want to encourage? Do we actually want to encourage greater car usage? And what's that doing to our city? And what it's doing to Melbourne? Or do we want to encourage active transport, which has such a positive impact on people's mental and physical health, massive benefits to our community as a cost? And I went to a thing on Friday where they talked about every time someone starts their car in Melbourne, the cost to our community is $9. Every time someone rides their bike, the cost to our community is 2 cents. We want to encourage the most efficient way of moving people around, and private cars is the most inefficient way of moving people around. And if our population doubles, are we going to double the amount of car parking we have? We're going to double the amount of roads we have? This city is already 25% of the space in Melbourne is already taken up by roads and car parking. We cannot increase that anymore. We want to encourage people to be more active, more locally connected, and one thing COVID showed us was people want to be actively engaged in their local community and to be able to move around freely and safely in their local community. And people, there's a gentleman from the Banyule Bug who is 94 who still goes for 3 rides a week. So this question of age is just irrelevant. So we need to encourage people to be able to move around. And walking and cycling is simply not safe in Banyule. It's as simple as that. 1.2% of the population ride a bike regularly in Banyule. Well below the metro average, well below our neighbours. So we need to do something about this. And if you look at what the state government, you talk about why we spend doing things more on road, we're getting a $20 billion road forced through the middle of our municipality, and we're looking at the impact that is having on us now. And if you read the stuff that came out today about their new design, how it's going to free up the streets, absolute rubbish. So we're spending all this money on building a road, and as we've known for 30 years, you cannot build your way out of congestion. Every city in the world has proven that. Other cities in the world are pulling up their urban freeways to make sure that people can move around freely and safely. We're going in the opposite direction. So, yes, this council is all about making transport, providing people with transport options. And if you provide people with transport options, the people who have to drive or want to drive will actually get more road capacity freed up. So that's what this council is trying to do. I'm supporting this strategy. I think it's a great advocacy list, and if we could do it, it would make this Banyule a better place to live.
Thank you, councillor. Would the second like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Mayor. I think Councillor Melican has hit the nail on the head. Excellent statement, Councillor Melican. This government, state and federal and local, spend millions subsidising vehicular transport. The proportion that government subsidises walking and cycling is absolutely minuscule in comparison to the subsidy amount that goes into roads, building roads and maintaining roads. We are an increasing population. We're looking at a population of Melbourne at 10 million. Already, there are suburbs, particularly within the Middle Ring, which includes a substantial proportion of Banyule, that are being dropped in livability terms because of the congestion. Number one issue, congestion. So it's no wonder that we're starting to approve more medium density developments with no parking requirements. There must be a push within especially government, for more active transport. It's the healthy way forward. Councillor Melican has spoken to the stats. We know that a lot more people would cycle if it was safe to do so, but it's not. Every time you jump on your bike, if you're not on an off-road trail, it can become quite precarious, particularly on major roads, having to negotiate traffic. I concur with everything Councillor Melican said. We need to be doing a lot more for transport advocacy, and we need to be combining with our Northern Council Alliance for greater power and a bigger voice on this particular part of our advocacy work. Thanks, Mayor.
Do we have any other councillors who wish to speak to this item? Councillor Grotti.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And look, I mentioned earlier whether or not this had gone out to community consultation. because I genuinely believe that this should not just be the Banyule Council advocacy plan to state government and federal government, it should be a Banyule community plan of advocacy. And I really want our community to be behind us and in lock and step with the council in our advocacy to other layers of government. And I note that here tonight we have 3 community leaders with us: Michelle Jarvis, Friends of Banyule; Brian Grace, if I may, Good Governance Banyule; Kevan Hill, BRAG, Banyule Ratepayers Action Group. All 3, from my understanding, well connected with different levels of government. I want to tap into that. I want to tap into our community. We've got to do this in partnership, and we need to have a plan, in my view, that our community leaders with us embrace, that we can take forward. And so in these comments, I'm extending a bit of an invitation to our community leaders here tonight, if you're willing to work with us on this advocacy, particularly from my perspective in Grimshaw on the Watsonia train station upgrades. Really want to get a good outcome there, and really looking for support to do that, and seeing the nods, and very grateful for that. I suppose the other thing that I just did want to highlight as well is that this is about, fully support the plan and what we're going to resolve, or hopefully resolve as a council, but we do need to get the basics right. And one of our speakers spoke about the fact that, from a council perspective, we need to look after our roads and do the basics. And driving here from council, and to be honest, what got me in a little bit of a disappointing mood was the fact that there were 4 potholes on Grimshaw on Greenwood Drive. And I'm at a loss, to be honest, I'm at a loss now as an individual councillor, what I need to do to try and get a minimum level of acceptable service on roads for our community. I tried with the Banyule Blitz, which would have been focused on hitting these roads and fixing potholes and fixing footpaths. I don't know what we need to do, but when I drive home from work on the way to council and there's 4 potholes and I'm consistently reporting these things to officers, it's one thing for us to be advocating active transport and going up to the state and federal governments, but if we can't fix our own roads and keep them with potholes, well, we're not leading by example. And so I hear what our speaker said on that, and I'd like us to actually take some action on some of the basics of this council. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor De Pasquale.
Okay, good. I'd want to follow that one. You okay? You want a glass of water? In listening to this conversation and the speakers tonight and the councillors speaking, I don't think this council has the balance correct with regards to transport advocacy. If we look at our population, I mean, you're now saying, or we are effectively, supposedly now saying to the very young in our community that, okay, your mother and father can't throw you in the car and drive you to school or basketball or football or soccer. You got to walk. You got to ride your bike. We're also overstepping the understanding that 1% of our community ride a bike in our community. I'm one of those. 1%. The fact of the matter is Melbourne is cold and it's wet. It's not like countries that have a high bike usage where it's better temperate or it's more conducive to riding and walking, etc. We are much more spread out in this city. This city has been designed in a spread out nature. It is not conducive to not being able to travel around. What we need to provide our community is options, different options of transport. You want to ride, you can ride. You want to walk, you can walk. You want to drive your car, you can drive your car. You want to catch the train, you can catch the train. Safety is a big issue in that. I mean, we're effectively saying to a young person in our community, as you're getting towards the age of 16, 17 and 18, look, don't worry about getting your licence because it's not that important these days anymore. Everyone's walking and riding and not driving anywhere. Now, how much of a disadvantage would that be to our youth? Not encouraging them to get their driver's licence, get their cars, move around freely. I don't think we've got the balance right here, where we seem to be pushed along a path of just, trying to facilitate for the people who have extra time, possibly extra money, extra resources, and they have the time to ride around rather than they have to jump in the car, drop the kids off because they're very busy. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, councillor. Do you have any other councillors? Councillor Neely.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I'd like to say overwhelmingly our community is behind us on this advocacy list. And I'd like to argue that there's no hidden agenda. It's based on need, it's based on research, and it's based on community feedback. So I'm a little bit caught off guard by a couple of my fellow councillors. We do not want to stop parents from dropping their kids off to sport. We want to just increase some pedestrian movement, cycling, and access to public transport. On the weekend, I completed the Around the Bay, or part of the cycle event, and people asked me, Liz, did you train? And to be honest, I didn't really train that much at all. I just did 100 kilometres. And I didn't train because I don't train often because I don't feel safe on the road near my house in Banyule. So for me, you know, riding on very narrow roads with cars flying past you, I really don't feel safe. So this advocacy list requires funding and upgrades, new crossings. It's quite well rounded. Pedestrian signals, better located bus stops, reducing speed limits. It's not just about cycling and walking, but better located user paths and improved integration through the North East Link for cycling and pedestrian connectivity, because the priority there is the road. That's built in. We want to do the rest. So I think this report shows very good work, very well-researched work from officers, and it highlights where the issues are across Banyule to avoid potential problems. People still have the right to travel the way they want to travel, but this is catering to an expanding municipality. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, councillor. Any other councillors? No? All right, I'll contribute. When it comes to community consultation, I know this goes back to 2015. I was a nominated person on the Banyule Integrated Transport Advocacy or for the Environment Committee to participate as a community member before I was a councillor. But over the last couple of years, I've had a lot of phone calls. We put through something called a CRM, that's a request to officers to attend to an issue. And several of the issues that have come up on this paper were people from the community telling me how difficult it is to achieve something, to walk across a road with small children to the school or to the station on a busy road, they can't get across it. It's when a wheelchair gets stuck at a road crossing because it's not DDA compliant, I had to lift him up and get him across the road. There's a lot of things, but one factor that comes to mind is I've identified 5 in my ward: Odenwood Bridge crossing, the Yarra Street Rosanna Road crossing, updates to the pedestrian crossing at Lower Heidelberg Road in East Ivanhoe Village, the intersection at Dora Street, Lower Heidelberg Road, and Banksia Street Underpass. All of those are advocacy to cross a road, to get humans across something in Banyule to where they want to go. And we get a lot of community feedback, and all of these are to cross a road, and we're putting more roads in. So I think it's really important. We do spend a lot on roads, but we also need to enable people to get across them and walk and cycle, and it's absolutely crucial. And I'd like to thank all the officers that contributed to this list, because they've been listening to priorities and considering them very carefully, and that's why we've had additions to this advocacy package. And this is an ongoing process where there's some existing and some additional. And I congratulate all the officers that contributed to this. Write a reply for the mover.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say to Councillor Grotti, at least he had a road to drive on. I rode my bike here and I certainly didn't have any safe cycling routes to get here. And if he didn't like Greenwood Drive, there's plenty of other options he could take. We have enough roads. We have no safe cycling routes in Banyule. And as Councillor Grotti De Pasquale said, we're not forcing anyone to do anything. We are providing alternatives. And in a safe, modern city that is growing at the rate of Melbourne, we need to provide those alternatives. We cannot continue to have 64% of people driving to work, 80% of kids going to school in a car. It simply can't continue. Otherwise, we're going to end up in a congested hellhole. And that's where we're heading. It's simply not safe for any alternatives. And what makes people feel safe and what people want open spaces where they can sit down in a quiet location and talk to their friends and mingle. Cars want big, wide open roads, plenty of car parking and no trees. And what are we doing? We're building our cities for cars. And it's hurting us, it's hurting our livability, it's hurting our physical and mental health, and it's causing tremendous problems. You've only got to look at the issues they're having on the fringes of Melbourne, where they are so totally car dependent, and every one of those cars is costing those people $12,000 a year and rising rapidly. Petrol's over $2 a litre, and we're saying, well, we need to provide for more cars. It is simply unsustainable. And if you talk about consultation, how much North East Link consultation have done about this northern package? We're going to have 21 days to respond to this massive project that's coming our way. And you're saying we should be consulting about our list of what we think is, where's our leadership? We have strategies, we have policies, and what we're proposing here is under those policies and under those strategies. So if you don't like what we're advocating for, get the policies changed. Go ahead. But this follows our policy. And so I'm glad you didn't get me fired up. So I support this list tonight. And in a modern city, we need to cater for people, not just cars.
Thank you. I could check in governance, but I think the answer is no. I now then put the motion. All those in favour? I declare the motion carried. We now move on to item 10, general business. And I believe we have a couple of items on this. First up, we have Councillor Champion.
Thanks, Mayor. I actually have a couple of general business items this evening. The first one is that this week in Banyule, we have some free activities, and they're at Watermark and Ivanhoe Aquatic and Olympic Leisure Centres. And the reason for this is we are promoting the This Girl Can campaign again this year. So this was created in the UK in 2015. It was a response to a survey finding that about 2 million fewer women than men participated in sport or physical activity. And Victoria established its first This Girl campaign in 2018. Australia was actually the first country to join the international movement. The key reason being, allegedly, Victorian women are a little bit self-conscious, and the main reasons that stopped them from trying new activities and getting involved in sport was a fear of being judged and of not being fit enough to start. So the This Girl campaign actually inspired almost 273,000 Victorian women to get active, which is awesome. So that's about 1 in 7 women aged between 18 to 65 getting more active because of this campaign. So the whole point of the campaign, This Girl Can, it inspires women to get active however, wherever and whenever they choose without being judged. So again, free activities at Watermark, Ivanhoe Aquatic and Olympic Leisure Centres. Things like baseball, lawn bowls or fitness boot camp are also available. They are free. Please go to the council's website, use the QR code. You're also able to go to This Girl Can website and they give you a little bit more information about what's going on in Victoria. The other item that I have, on Thursday, the 28th of September, as the chair of the Yarra Plenty Regional Library Board, I attended a very special event at Eltham Library, the unofficial unveiling of Alan Marshall's portrait. Many residents are familiar with the statue of Alan Marshall, who greets us on entry to the Eltham Library. Now, inside the library, his rejuvenated portrait hangs inside the entrance, watching over us as visitors and staff, all the users of the library. So this portrait was actually painted by another local artist, Alan Martin, in 1956. And the portrait was nominated for the Archibald Prize in the same year. So both Allens hail from Eltham and the Shire, and they mixed together in artistic circles for many, many years. Now you may be thinking, oh, that name sounds really familiar, because Alan Marshall is very well known amongst generations of readers and students of his classic novel, I Can Jump Puddles, which highlights his experience as a child growing up with a disability. So the unofficial unveiling was made extra special by the attendance of many members of the artist Alan Martin's family, along with the Yarra Plenty Regional Library CEO Jane Cowell, Nillumbik Mayor, Deputy Mayor, the Nillumbik Historical Society, Nillumbik Performing Arts Scene, as well as Eltham Library Manager and staff, and a lot of interested local residents. So in addition to this significant piece of local art, Eltham Library has recently undergone a refurbishment. It has exceeded pre-restriction numbers, which has achieved over 1,000 visitors through its doors last year. The significant features of Eltham Library include its classic architectural style, some might say typical Eltham, as well as the fact there are uninterrupted natural leafy vistas through every large window, enhancing this library's environment. You may be wondering, why am I talking about something in Nillumbik? Because Eltham Library is actually very close and is probably the local library for many members of the Sherborne ward as well as Beale ward. It is actually closer than Watsonia Library and Ivanhoe Library and Cultural Hub. So, and it is actually my local library. So this is why I'm referring to the Eltham Library. It is a beautiful library if you ever get a chance to go and have a look at the beautiful artwork. Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. You read my mind. Next over to Deputy Mayor Alida McKern.
Thanks, Mayor. I attended the Gambling Harm Symposium hosted by Hume City Council last week. Hume City Council is ranked 4th highest in the state for pokies gambling, or was in the last financial year, after Brimbank, Casey, and I think Greater Dandenong. Excellent presentations were delivered by academics in the field of gambling minimisation harm. And we had speakers of the calibre of Dr. Charles Livingston from Monash Uni and Dr. Lauren Guerrieri from RMIT, and a reporter on inequality for The Guardian, as well as an absolutely insightful performance by Three Sides of the Coin, which I'm hoping we might hear more from in the future. There was quite a substantial representation from councils across the state, and I was really delighted to be there representing Banyule. But most importantly, on behalf of this council, I'd like to thank the City of Hume for organising this important, timely and informative symposium, which essentially called for stronger regulations on all forms of gambling and funding for gambling harm services as a public health issue. So a number of my thoughts regarding tonight's draft strategy were sourced from that symposium. I'd also like to mention around the Bay on the weekend. Did you know, Mayor, that every 3 days an Australian is diagnosed with bone marrow failure syndrome, which can lead to increased risk of blood cancers such as leukemia? So I was happy to join the City of Banyule staff and 5 fellow councillors, including Councillor Elizabeth Neely, our Mayor, Councillor Mark Di Pasquale and Councillor Tom Malikan, participate in the annual Around the Bay bike ride to support vital medical research and family support into bone marrow failure syndrome. Perfect cycling conditions made for a very good day, and also a good opportunity for councillors to spend some time with staff. Other councillors may wish to talk briefly about their experience of the day, and otherwise that's it for me. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. It was a fun day, but hard work, I must say, and dangerous on some of those intersections. Now, over to Councillor Garotti. No? Yes? There we go.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I forgot it was that long ago that I submitted. think it's just important to acknowledge an item of condolence. Mr. Colin Lane, Council recently received a notice that former City of Heidelberg Councillor Mr. Colin Lane has passed away. Colin was a councillor for the McLeod ward for 16 years and the Mayor of the City of Heidelberg in 1971. He moved from the area and had been living in Queensland in 1981. On behalf of Council, we offer our sincere condolences to Colin's son John, who contacted the Council about this, and his family and loved ones at the news of his recent passing. And we'll provide this to the family. And I think it's just important to acknowledge that, and hopefully that gives some comfort to his family and an acknowledgement of a past councillor and mayor who served our city. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Do we have any other general businesses? No? We'll now move on to public questions then. We have 4 public questions. I now request Council Director of Corporate Services, Mark Giulio, to read out the questions and directors to read out Council's response. The public questions will be included in the minutes of this meeting. The minutes will be available on the website later this week.
Thank you, Mayor. I have first question for Jai Sanford, and the question reads, which councillors have met with My Place Greensborough and what topics were discussed in these meetings? This question was allowed according to the governance rules, and I'll refer the response to the Manager of Governance Integrity for a response.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. To our understanding, no formally arranged meetings have taken place between individual Banyule City Council councillors or a group of councillors and My Place Greensborough to date. We do know on the 13th of April this year, Councillor Champion had an informal conversation with 3 residents at the residents' request. And at the time, Councillor Champion was unaware that the residents were affiliated with My Place. It is unknown whether these members were affiliated with My Place, Greensborough or other. And Councillor Champion was asked without notice on a host of questions in relation to the 20-minute neighbourhood. It's unknown whether any other informal conversations or meetings have taken place to date with councillors and a member of My Place, if members or residents associated with My Place have not identified themselves as My Place representatives. Whilst Council has no obligation to provide an informal meeting of Council's record, whilst Council has an obligation to provide an informal meeting of Council's record to Council if it meets the definition under the governance rules, there is no requirement for Council to record instances or meetings with residents and groups that fall outside that definition. And just for completeness, that definition is found on Chapter 6, Miscellaneous of the Governance Rules.
Second question is from an anonymous submitter, and the question reads, will Council hold an event to coincide with the raising of the transgender flag on Transgender Day of Remembrance? This question is allowed in accordance with the governance rules and our public question time guidelines, and I refer to the Acting Director of Community Wellbeing for a response.
Transgender Day of Remembrance is acknowledged on Council's Days of Significance calendar, and Council is still in the process of considering whether there will be an event alongside any flag raising on the 20th of November, but the day will be marked in some way through social media or other channels.
Next question is from Jane Crone of Eaglemont, and the question reads, why has the Warringal Conservation Society only been given until December to vacate this space without being explained the reason for this upsetting disruption and without consideration about where they will now store their library, publications and equipment? And this question is allowed in accordance with the governance rules and our public question time guidelines. And I refer the question to Acting Director of Community Wellbeing for a response.
The Warringal Conservation Society currently meet at the Old Shire Hall along with other community groups. Due to the lack of appropriate storage space at that site, Council is going to undertake work to upgrade the storage facility at the Old Shire office by creating a new storage space to accommodate the Conservation Society, Girl Guides and other users of the Old Shire office. A great improvement that provides access for all users, both new and existing. Council requires the space to be vacant before any works can commence, and Council officers will work with the Conservation Society to find alternative space in the interim if required. This upgraded storage will add great value to this community facility and benefit all user groups. Once the work has been completed, the groups will not be compromised on space and access, and officers will continue to work proactively with the Conservation Society to ensure their needs are met.
Next question is from Alicia Curry from Rosanna, and the question reads, would council list the community consultations where Facebook comments have been noted or relied on, and whether Facebook comments were noted or relied on in project feedback such as the Rosanna Library and Woolworths partnership? This question is allowed in accordance with the governance rules and our public question time guidelines, and I refer to the Director of Assets and City Services for response.
Council provides a range of ways for people to contribute to consultation projects, including online and face-to-face methods. Primarily, Council uses its community engagement website, Shaping Banyule, to collect feedback and use social media and other communication tools to encourage people to visit the site and have a say. Due to the nature of social media, there are times where comments are received directly on the social media platform. While these comments are relevant and considered feedback to the project open for consultation, they will be considered along with comments received directly through Shaping Banyule or hard copy methods and captured in relevant consultation summary reports, as in the case of the public toilet strategy. As direct social media contribution cannot be verified and demographic information cannot be sought, Council continues to encourage visits and contributions to Shaping Banyule to capture the most complete and accurate community feedback.
And that's it. All right, thank you. We now move on to the closure of meeting. In accordance with Section 66(2)(a) of the Local Government Act 2020, the meeting will now be closed to members of the public for consideration of one confidential matter. Can I please have a councillor move and second for the council to close the meeting to members of the public prior to considering the confidential item 11.1, strategic commercial opportunity? Mover Councillor Garotti, seconded by Councillor Neely. Councillor Champion. Now, put the motion. All those in favour? I declare the motion carried. The next ordinary council meeting will be held on Monday, the 30th of October, 2023. I now close the meeting to the public at 9:30 p.m. Thank you for your attendance and those online.